The concrete walls of San Quentin's death row echoed with the metallic clang of steel doors. Marcus Reaper Sullivan sat in his cell, leather jacket draped over his shoulders despite prison regulations, counting down his final hours. Tomorrow he would die for the murder of 3 rival gang members, a crime that had shocked even hardened criminals. But Marcus wasn't just any hell rider. For 15 years he'd been an undercover federal agent, so deep in the motorcycle club that even his handler had lost contact. His mission exposed the drug trafficking network that stretched from California to Mexico. The 3 men he'd killed? They had discovered his true identity and were about to execute an innocent family. Now, with lethal injections scheduled for dawn, Marcus made one last request: to see Sarah, the woman carrying his child. She was the only person who could verify his story, the only one who knew about the evidence hidden in their apartment. But Sarah had vanished 3 months ago, and the clock was ticking. Could love and truth triumph over a system bent on justice, or would an innocent man die protecting a secret that could bring down an entire criminal empire? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus stared at the cracked ceiling, his weathered hands folded behind his head. The skull tattoo on his knuckles, a requirement for hell riders, seemed to mock him now. 15 years of his life gone, 15 years of becoming someone else, of forgetting who Marcus Thompson from Ohio had been before the FBI recruited him straight out of Marine Special Forces. Footsteps approached, heavy boots on polished concrete. Warden Hayes appeared at the cell door, his face a mask of professional indifference, but Marcus caught the flicker of something else in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or maybe just fatigue from presiding over too many executions. "Your attorney's here," Hayes said, keys jangling. "Final consultation." Marcus didn't move. "I told Rodriguez everything yesterday. There's nothing left to discuss. He says it's important." The warden's voice carried an odd note, something about new information. That got Marcus's attention. He sat up slowly, every muscle protesting from months of confinement. Rodriguez had been a court-appointed lawyer, competent but overwhelmed, drowning in cases with defendants who actually were guilty. Marcus had never told him the truth, couldn't risk it without Sarah's corroboration. The attorney's room smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Rodriguez looked haggard, his usually neat appearance disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he arranged papers on the metal table. "Marcus," he began, then caught himself. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been contacted by someone claiming to know you, someone who says your real name is Thompson." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained impassive, another skill learned during his years with the Hell Riders. "Don't know what you're talking about. She says she's carrying your child." The words hit like a physical blow. "Where is she?" Rodriguez leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the secure room. "Safe house. Federal protection. She's been hiding from the Hell Riders since you were arrested. They know she was with you the night of the murders." Marcus closed his eyes, relief and terror warring in his chest. Sarah was alive, their baby was safe, but if she'd gone to the feds, it meant the Hell Riders were closing in. "She has something," Rodriguez continued, "evidence, but she won't turn it over unless she sees you first. It's too dangerous. If the Hell Riders find out—" "They already know." The lawyer's voice was barely a whisper. "There was an attempt on the safe house yesterday. She won't survive another day without your help." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal. This was exactly what he'd feared. Sarah had always been too smart, too observant. She'd pieced together more than he'd ever told her about his real work. And now that knowledge was a death sentence. "What evidence?" he asked. "Financial records, shell companies, names and dates of drug shipments. She says you gave her everything before your arrest, told her to hide it if anything happened to you." Smart woman. Marcus had suspected the Hell Riders would eventually discover his identity, so he'd prepared contingencies. but he'd never imagined being framed for murder before he could extract the information safely. "There's more," Rodriguez said, studying Marcus's face carefully. "She claims you're federal law enforcement. Undercover for 15 years. Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Like I said, don't know what you're talking about." But Rodriguez smiled grimly. "The way you carry yourself, the way you assess threats, the fact that you killed 3 armed men in under 30 seconds with your bare hands. You're not just some biker, are you?" The fluorescent light flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. Outside, evening was falling. Marcus had perhaps 14 hours left to live, unless he made a choice that could save Sarah and their unborn child, but might doom them all. "Set up the meeting," he said finally. "But Rodriguez, if this goes wrong, more people than just me are going to die." The warden's office felt smaller than Detective Sarah Chen remembered, its wood-paneled walls closing in as she studied the files spread across Thomas Morrison's desk. 3 years had passed since she'd last set foot in Riverside Correctional, but the institutional smell of disinfectant and despair remained unchanged. "You sure about this request, Morrison?" Chen asked, her fingers drumming against the worn leather of her jacket. "Marcus Delacroix hasn't had a single visitor in 8 years. Now, 12 hours before his execution, he wants to see a pregnant girlfriend nobody knew existed." Morrison leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight. "That's what he claims. Says her name is Elena Vasquez, and she's carrying his child. He's demanding it's his constitutional right to see her before—" He gestured vaguely toward the execution chamber down the hall. Chen had been the lead detective on the Delacroix case, the one who'd put together the evidence that sent him to death row. The Iron Serpent's enforcer had been convicted of murdering 3 rival gang members in what prosecutors called a calculated display of territorial violence. The crime scene had been brutal, execution-style killings in an abandoned warehouse, Delacroix's prints on the murder weapon, his DNA on the victim's clothing. "Have you verified this woman exists?" Chen asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer would complicate everything. "That's where it gets interesting." Morrison slid a manila folder across his desk. "Elena Vasquez, 26, works as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. Clean record, no known gang affiliations, and she's 7 months pregnant." Chen opened the folder, studying the DMV photo of a young Latina woman with intelligent dark eyes and an earnest expression. Nothing about Elena Vasquez suggested she'd be romantically involved with a convicted killer. When did she last see Delacroix? According to her, about 8 months ago. She claims they had a relationship she kept secret from everyone, including her family. Says she only found out about his execution date yesterday when she finally worked up the courage to contact the prison. The timeline made Chen's detective instincts twitch. 8 months ago would have been right around the time of Delacroix's final appeal hearing. She remembered him in the courtroom that day, stone-faced, refusing to speak even when the judge asked if he had any last words before his death sentence was confirmed. "What does Delacroix say about the relationship?" Morrison's expression darkened. "That's where this gets really strange. He's not talking about romance or the baby. He keeps insisting Elena has something that belongs to him, something he calls the truth about that night." Chen felt the familiar chill that always preceded a case breaking wide open. She'd built her career on reading between the lines, and Delacroix's words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. "I want to interview him before this meeting happens." "Chen, the man scheduled to die in—" Morrison checked his watch. 11 hours and 43 minutes. "The governor's already denied clemency. What's the point?" But Chen was already standing, her mind racing through the possibilities. "The point is that Marcus Delacroix spent 8 years refusing to see anyone, including his own lawyer and the priest. Now he's desperate enough to use his final hours on a woman who claims to be pregnant with his child. And he's talking about truth instead of love." Morrison studied her carefully. "You think there's something wrong with the conviction?" It wasn't a question. Chen had a reputation for being thorough, sometimes to a fault. Her clearance rate was impressive, but her willingness to reopen cases when new evidence surfaced, had made her both respected and occasionally resented within the department. "I think a man facing the electric chair doesn't waste his last request on sentiment," she replied. "Delacroix was violent, but he was never stupid. If he wants to see Elena Vasquez, it's because she has information that matters." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing institutional protocol against the possibility of executing an innocent man. Finally, he reached for his phone. "I'll have Delacroix brought to the interview room. You've got 1 hour before the scheduled meeting with Vasquez." As Chen headed toward the prison's maximum security wing, her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the words stopped her cold. "Detective Chen, Marcus didn't kill those men. I have proof. But if I come forward, they'll kill me too. Elena." Chen stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Either Elena Vasquez was a disturbed woman inserting herself into a notorious case, or the Iron Serpent's enforcer sitting on death row was about to become the center of the biggest wrongful conviction scandal of her career. She deleted the message and continued walking, but her hand remained on her phone. In 11 hours, the state would execute Marcus Delacroix. Whether that would be justice or murder depended on what Elena Vasquez knew and whether Chen could uncover the truth in time. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen stared at the case file spread across her desk. 3 years ago, she'd been convinced Marcus Reaper Castellano was guilty. The evidence had been damning. His fingerprints on the murder weapon, his known association with the rival gang, and his complete lack of an alibi for the night Tommy Snake Rodriguez was found beaten to death behind the rusty anchor bar. But something about yesterday's prison visit gnawed at her. The way Marcus had looked at Elena, the desperation in his voice when he spoke about their unborn child, it didn't match the cold-blooded killer she'd helped convict. Sarah pulled out the crime scene photos, studying them for what felt like the 100th time. Snake Rodriguez lay crumpled between 2 dumpsters, his skull crushed by repeated blows from a tire iron. The weapon had been found 3 blocks away, wiped clean except for one perfect thumbprint, Marcus's thumbprint. Too perfect, she thought now, though she'd dismissed such doubts during the original investigation. Her phone rang. "Chen. Detective, this is Warden Phillips at State Correctional. You asked to be notified if anything unusual happened with inmate Castellano." Sarah straightened. "What's going on?" "He's refused his breakfast, lunch, and now dinner. Says he won't eat until he sees his girlfriend again. The chaplain tried talking to him, but he's not budging." "Has he said anything else?" "Just keeps asking about some box. Says Elena needs to bring him a box from under their bed." The warden paused. "Look, detective, I've seen a lot of condemned men, and this one's acting different. Usually they're either broken or raging. Castellano seems focused, like he's planning something." After hanging up, Sarah drummed her fingers on the desk, a box under the bed. What could be so important that Marcus would risk his final days starving? She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. Elena Vasquez lived in a run-down apartment complex on the south side, the kind of place where people minded their own business and asked no questions. Sarah had interviewed her twice during the original investigation, but Elena had been too devastated to provide much useful information. The pregnancy had changed her. Where Elena had once been rail-thin with hollow cheeks, she now carried the soft roundness of impending motherhood. Her eyes, though still shadowed with grief, held a fierce protectiveness that hadn't been there before. "Detective Chen?" Elena opened the door wider, surprised. "Has something happened to Marcus? He's refusing to eat. The warden says he mentioned a box, something under your bed that he wants you to bring." Elena's hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly. I don't know what he's talking about." But her eyes said otherwise. Sarah had spent 15 years reading people, and Elena Vasquez was hiding something. "Elena, in 3 days, Marcus will be executed. If there's anything at all, that might help explain what happened that night, you need to tell me. You think he's guilty?" Elena's voice was flat. "You all do. I think I might have been wrong. The admission hung between them. Elena studied Sarah's face, searching for deception or false hope. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small but clean, decorated with pictures of Elena and Marcus together, at the beach, at motorcycle rallies, laughing at some private joke. These weren't photos of a monster and his victim, they showed two people genuinely in love. Elena led her to the bedroom and knelt beside the bed with obvious difficulty. She pulled out a shoebox wrapped in plastic bags and set it on the dresser with trembling hands. "Marcus made me promise never to show this to anyone unless—" She trailed off. Unless what? Unless they were going to kill him for something he didn't do. Sarah's pulse quickened as Elena removed the plastic wrapping. Inside were dozens of photographs, audio cassettes, and handwritten notes. She picked up the first photo and felt the world tilt. It showed Snake Rodriguez accepting a thick envelope from a man in an expensive suit, a man Sarah recognized as Vincent Vinny Torino, head of the Torino crime family. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 weeks before Snake's murder. Marcus had been investigating Snake, Elena whispered. Snake was skimming money from drug deals and selling information to the Torinos about the Serpent's operations. Marcus found out and started gathering evidence. Sarah rifled through more photos, secret meetings, money exchanges, documents that would have destroyed Snake and seriously damaged the Torino organization. Why didn't Marcus come forward with this? He tried to handle it within the club first. Snake was still a serpent, still a brother. Marcus planned to confront him, give him a chance to make it right. Elena's voice broke. But someone got to Snake first. Someone who knew Marcus was investigating. Someone who made sure Marcus would take the fall. Sarah stared at the evidence that could free an innocent man, her mind racing through the implications. If Marcus hadn't killed Snake Rodriguez, then someone else had. Someone with the resources to frame him perfectly. Someone who was about to let an innocent man die. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen spread the case files across the metal table in the prison's conference room. 2 years of investigation, hundreds of witness statements, and forensic evidence that had seemed ironclad now felt fragile in her hands. Maya's words from the previous day echoed in her mind. He was protecting someone. Warden Bradley sat across from her, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee since dawn. "You really think Martinez might be innocent, after all this time?" Sarah pulled out the crime scene photos, studying them with fresh eyes. The Crimson Devil's clubhouse, splattered with blood. 3 bodies, execution style, and Jake Martinez's fingerprints on the murder weapon, a .45 caliber pistol registered to the club's former president. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a photo of Jake's hands taken during booking. "These cuts on his knuckles, we assumed they were from the struggle, but what if they weren't from fighting the victims? What are you getting at?" Maya said he came home that night bloodied and terrified, not angry, not adrenaline-pumped like you'd expect from someone who just committed a triple homicide. Terrified. Sarah flipped through witness statements, finding the testimony of Rita Vasquez, the clubhouse bartender. Rita said she heard shouting around 10 p.m., then gunshots at 10:15, but Jake's alibi put him at Murphy's bar until 9:30, and it's a 20-minute ride to the clubhouse. 15 minutes to kill 3 men seems tight, but doable, Bradley offered. "That's not what bothers me." Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through old messages. "I want to talk to Rita again. Something about her testimony never sat right." An hour later, they sat in Rita's cramped apartment above a laundromat. The woman looked older than her 43 years, weathered by too many late nights and hard choices. Her hands shook as she lit her 4th cigarette since they'd arrived. "I told you everything I knew at the trial," Rita said, avoiding Sarah's eyes. "You said you heard Jake's voice during the argument. But how could you be sure it was him?" Rita's cigarette trembled between her fingers. "I know Jake's voice. Been hearing it for 3 years. But you were in the bar area, and the office where the murders happened is soundproofed. Tank had it done special for private meetings." Sarah leaned forward. You couldn't have heard voices clearly through that wall. The cigarette fell from Rita's fingers, scattering ash across the coffee table. Her composure cracked like old paint. "They said they'd kill me," she whispered. "Said they'd make it look like an overdose, and everyone would believe it because of my history." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who said that?" "I can't. You don't understand what these people are capable of. Rita, Jake Martinez is going to die in less than 24 hours. If he's innocent..." "He is innocent." The words burst out of Rita like a dam breaking. "Jake wasn't even there when it happened. I saw him leave Murphy's, but he went north on Highway 9, not toward the clubhouse. Then who did you hear arguing?" Rita buried her face in her hands. Tommy Hendricks and Marcus Webb. They were Tank's lieutenants, but they'd been skimming money from the drug runs. Tank found out that night. Sarah knew those names. Hendricks had died in a motorcycle accident 6 months after Jake's arrest. Webb had disappeared entirely, rumored to be hiding somewhere in Mexico. They killed Tank and the others? Webb shot them. Tommy held them down. Rita's voice was barely audible. "I was hiding in the supply closet when they came out covered in blood. Webb saw me. Said if I ever told anyone what really happened, he'd come back and finish the job. Why frame Jake?" Jake had been asking questions about missing money. Tank trusted him, was going to promote him to lieutenant. Webb knew Jake was getting close to the truth, so when they needed someone to pin it on, Rita shrugged helplessly. Sarah's mind raced. The gun. How did Jake's prints get on it? Webb planted it in Jake's garage while he was at work, made sure to handle it with Jake's gloves first. Rita looked up, tears streaming down her face. Jake never even knew what hit him. By the time the cops came knocking, Webb had already fed them half the story. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Rita, I need you to come with me. We need to get this on record immediately. What about Webb? What if he finds out? Webb's been off the grid for 2 years, and even if he wasn't, protecting an innocent man is worth the risk." As they rushed towards Sarah's car, she called the warden. Jake's execution was scheduled for 8 p.m. tomorrow. She had 29 hours to unravel a conspiracy and save an innocent man's life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen reviewed the case files spread across her desk. 3 months had passed since Marcus Steele Rodriguez was convicted of murdering Detective Jimmy Walsh, but something about the whole thing still gnawed at her. She'd been Walsh's partner for 2 years before his death, and the official story had never quite added up in her mind. The knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Warden Thompson entered, his expression grave. "Detective Chen, I need to speak with you about Rodriguez." Sarah looked up from the files. "What about him?" "He's made a final request. Wants to see his pregnant girlfriend before the execution next week." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Thing is, we can't locate her. Thought you might have some insights from the investigation." "Elena Vasquez?" Sarah frowned. "She disappeared right after the trial ended. Figured she wanted to get as far away from this mess as possible." "Well, Rodriguez is adamant. Says he won't cooperate with the execution protocols unless he sees her." Thompson rubbed his forehead. "The governor's office is breathing down my neck about this. They want everything to go smoothly." The next morning, Sarah drove to Elena's last known address, a small apartment complex on the east side of town. The landlord, a weathered man named Pete, remembered her well. "Nice girl, that Elena," he said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Shame about her boyfriend, though I gotta say I was surprised when I heard what he'd done. Seemed like a decent enough guy the few times I met him. Any idea where she might have gone?" Pete shook his head. "Paid up her lease through the end of the month, then just vanished. Left some furniture behind too, like she was in a real hurry." Sarah spent the rest of the week following dead ends. Elena's former colleagues at the hospital hadn't heard from her. Her few friends claimed ignorance. Even her mother, who lived 3 states away, insisted she hadn't seen her daughter since before the trial. On Friday evening, Sarah was about to give up when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Detective Chen? Speaking. This is Elena Vasquez. I heard you've been looking for me." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Elena, where are you? That's not important. What's important is that Marcus wants to see me. He does. He's asked for you as his final request before the execution. There was a long silence on the other end. When Elena spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. He shouldn't have asked for that. Why not? Because seeing him again will destroy me. Another silence, longer this time. Sarah could hear Elena breathing, could almost feel her internal struggle through the phone. You investigated that case, Elena said finally. You knew Detective Walsh. Did you really believe Marcus killed him? The question hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She'd buried her doubts, trusted in the system, accepted the evidence as presented. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, those doubts always resurfaced. The evidence was pretty clear, Sarah said carefully. Evidence can be manufactured. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the greatest betrayal. Elena's voice grew stronger. Meet me tomorrow at Riverside Park by the old oak tree. Come alone. And Detective Chen? Bring everything you have on the Walsh case. All of it. Elena, if you know something, tomorrow, 2 o'clock. And Detective? Watch your back. The people who killed Detective Walsh and framed Marcus are still out there, and they've gotten away with it for months now. They won't hesitate to kill again if they think their secret is in danger. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone. Her hands were shaking as she set it down. If Elena was telling the truth, then everything she'd believed about the case was wrong. An innocent man was about to die, and the real killers were walking free. Sarah looked at the clock. 24 hours to learn the truth. The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room buzzed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen spread the photographs across the metal table. Each image told a piece of a story that was rapidly unraveling everything they thought they knew about Marcus Steele Rodriguez and the triple homicide that had put him on death row 3 years ago. Look at this, Chen said to her partner, Detective Ray Valdez, pointing to a grainy surveillance photo from a gas station 2 blocks from the crime scene. The timestamp shows 11:47 p.m. The murders happened at midnight, according to our original timeline. Valdez leaned closer, adjusting his reading glasses. The figure in the photo was clearly Marcus, his distinctive leather jacket and build unmistakable. But something was wrong with the picture they'd painted at trial. He's not alone, Valdez observed. A second figure stood partially obscured by Marcus's frame, but the curve of a woman's silhouette was visible. Who is that? Chen pulled out another photograph, this one from the defense attorney S files that had been buried in bureaucratic red tape until yesterday. Security footage from the apartment complex across the street. Watch the body language. In the still frame, Marcus appeared to be shielding the woman, his posture protective rather than aggressive. His hands were visible, empty, positioned in a way that suggested he was calming someone down rather than preparing for violence. The prosecution never presented this angle, Chen muttered, feeling the familiar knot of unease that came when a case started falling apart. 3 people died that night. Tommy Vega, his girlfriend Maria, and her brother Carlos, all shot execution-style with Marcus's gun. The door opened and Lieutenant Brooks entered, carrying a thick manila folder. His expression was grim. The ballistics report you requested came back, the one comparing the bullets from that night to the test fires from Marcus's Glock. Chen looked up expectantly. The rifling patterns match, but there's something else. The forensics team found traces of powder residue on the gun that don't match Marcus's prints. Someone else fired that weapon, Sarah. Someone with smaller hands. The 3 detectives stood in silence, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Chen's mind raced back to her conversation with Elena Santos, Marcus's pregnant girlfriend. The fear in Elena's eyes hadn't been the terror of a woman visiting her condemned lover. It had been something else entirely. We need to talk to Elena again, Chen said, but this time not in the prison. Somewhere she might actually tell us the truth. 2 hours later, they found Elena at the diner where she worked, her baby bump now noticeably larger than it had been just days ago. She moved slowly between tables, refilling coffee cups with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting tables for years. When she saw Chen approaching, her face went pale. "Mrs. Santos, we need to speak with you. It's about Marcus." Elena's hand instinctively moved to her belly. Did something happen?" "He's fine, but we've discovered some new evidence. Evidence that suggests he might not be guilty of the crimes he's been condemned for." Elena's legs seemed to give out slightly, and she grabbed the back of a nearby chair for support. "I can't. Not here. My manager will—" "This is a murder investigation," Valdez said gently but firmly. "We can do this here, or we can do it at the station, but we're going to do it." Elena looked around the nearly empty diner, then nodded toward a corner booth. They sat across from her, and Chen placed the photographs on the table. "We know Marcus wasn't alone that night. We know someone else fired his gun. What we don't know is why he's been protecting them for 3 years, willing to die rather than tell the truth." Elena's hands shook as she stared at the images. Tears began forming in her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what kind of people they were. Tommy Vega and his crew, they weren't just drug dealers, they were monsters." "What happened that night, Elena?" "Marcus didn't kill them," she said, finally meeting Chen's gaze. "But he knows who did, and he knows why. And he made a choice to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves." Chen leaned forward. "Who, Elena? Who was Marcus protecting?" Elena wiped her eyes with a napkin, smearing her mascara. "Someone who had already been through hell, someone who would have been destroyed by a trial, by the media circus, by everything that comes with killing 3 people, even when they deserve to die. We need a name." Elena placed her hand on her stomach and closed her eyes. "The baby I'm carrying, it's not Marcus's. We've been lying about that too. The father—" She took a shuddering breath. "The father was murdered that night, trying to protect his sister from Tommy Vega's sick games." The pieces began clicking into place with devastating clarity. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen spread the crime scene photos across her desk for what felt like the 100th time. 3 years had passed since the Riverside warehouse murders, and she'd been certain Marcus Steele Rodriguez was their man. The evidence had seemed ironclad: his fingerprints on the murder weapon, eyewitness testimony placing him at the scene, and his own gang's refusal to provide an alibi. But Maya's revelation about the pregnancy timeline had cracked something open, a fissure in what she'd believed to be solid truth. Her partner, Detective Jim Morrison, walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder thick with documents. "You look like hell, Chen. When's the last time you went home?" "Yesterday. Maybe the day before." She accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the bitter steam. "Jim, I need you to look at something with fresh eyes." Morrison settled into his chair, his weathered face creasing with concern. They'd been partners for 7 years, and he knew that tone. "This about the Rodriguez case? Sarah, the man's scheduled to die in 6 days. Appeals court already—" "The pregnancy changes the timeline." She slid a photograph across the desk. "Maya Santos is 8 months pregnant. If Steele's the father, he couldn't have been planning to skip town like we thought. He was planning a future." Morrison studied the image of the young woman's swollen belly, then looked back at his partner. Or he knocked her up and decided to make one last big score before disappearing forever. Wouldn't be the first time a criminal abandoned a pregnant girlfriend. Sarah shook her head, pulling out another file. "I've been going through Steele's financial records again. Look at this. 3 months before the murders, he started making regular deposits into a savings account. Small amounts but consistent. And here," she pointed to a bank statement, 2 weeks before the warehouse job, he put down a deposit on an apartment, 2-bedroom place in Queens, far from gang territory. Criminals lie, Sarah. They create false narratives to throw us off. But what if this time the narrative is true?" She stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the precinct parking lot. "What if we got it wrong?" Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying his partner's reflection in the glass. "Walk me through it. What's bothering you besides the pregnancy?" Sarah turned back to face him. The murder weapon. Steele's prints were on it, yes, but only on the handle. No blood trace on his clothes, no gunshot residue, even though the shooting happened in an enclosed space. He could have changed clothes, washed his hands. In the 15 minutes between the 911 call and when patrol picked him up 6 blocks away, Jim, I've been thinking about his arrest. He wasn't running. He was walking down Maple Street, hands visible, no attempt to evade. Does that sound like someone fleeing a triple homicide? Morrison frowned, reaching for the arrest report. Arresting officer noted he seemed disoriented, kept asking what happened. We assumed he was playing dumb, or he genuinely didn't know. Sarah returned to her desk, pulling out her evidence bag containing Steele's leather jacket. Look at this again. Blood spatter on the back, but it's a cast-off pattern. If he was the shooter, the blood should be on the front. Unless he turned around after. The trajectory's wrong. Sarah had consulted with forensics experts during her sleepless nights. This pattern suggests he was behind the shooter, not wielding the weapon. Morrison set down his coffee, his expression growing serious. You're saying he was a witness, not the perpetrator. I'm saying we may have sent the wrong man to death row. The words hung heavy in the air between them. And if that's true, the real killer has been free for 3 years. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Maya Santos, Steele wants to see you. Says he's ready to tell the whole truth. Sarah showed the message to Morrison, who whistled low. That's either a desperate man's last gambit or the confession of an innocent man who's been protecting someone. Sarah grabbed her jacket from the back of her chair. There's something else. I ran the ballistics report through the database again, looking for similar cases. The .38 used in the warehouse murders? Same weapon was used in a liquor store robbery 8 months later. Steele was already in county lockup when that happened. Morrison stood slowly, the implications hitting him. Same gun means same shooter, or at least same criminal organization. Sarah was already moving toward the door. We need to get to the prison. If Steele's been covering for someone all this time, Maya's visit might have finally convinced him to break his silence. As they headed for the elevator, Morrison caught his partner's arm. Sarah, if you're right about this, if we got it wrong, she met his gaze steadily, then we've got 6 days to prove it before an innocent man dies for crimes he didn't commit. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Maria Santos spread the crime scene photos across her desk for what felt like the 100th time. 3 years had passed since the Riverside massacre, and she'd memorized every detail. The blood spatter patterns, the positioning of the bodies, the spent shell casings scattered like deadly confetti across the warehouse floor. But now, with Elena's revelation echoing in her mind, everything looked different. Jake Razor Morrison hadn't been the shooter. She could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had made her question the case from the beginning, the same instinct her superiors had told her to ignore when the evidence seemed so clear-cut. Her phone buzzed. Santos? Detective, it's Officer Chen from County. Your death row inmate is asking for you specifically. Says he'll only talk to you about what his girlfriend told him during the visit. Maria's pulse quickened. I'll be right there. 20 minutes later, she sat across from Jake in the sterile visiting room, studying the man she'd helped put on death row. His tattooed hands were cuffed to the metal table, but his eyes held a clarity she hadn't seen during the trial. Gone was the defiant bravado, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like hope. Elena told you about Tommy, Jake said without preamble. Maria kept her expression neutral. Why don't you tell me what you think she said? A bitter smile crossed Jake's face. 3 years I've been protecting him. 3 years I've been ready to die for something I didn't do because I thought he was dead, because Victor Kozlov told me he was dead. Victor Kozlov. Maria leaned forward. The name had surfaced during their investigation, but they'd never been able to connect the Russian crime boss to the warehouse massacre. What does Kozlov have to do with this? Everything. Jake's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. My brother Tommy was working for him, skimming money from the drug operations. When Kozlov found out, he threatened to kill Tommy's family, his wife, his 2 little girls. Tommy came to me, begging for help. Maria activated her phone's recording app, keeping it hidden beneath the table. What kind of help? I was supposed to meet Tommy at the warehouse that night. We had a plan to fake his death, make it look like he died in whatever went down. Then he'd disappear, start fresh somewhere Kozlov couldn't find him. Jake's jaw tightened. But when I got there, everyone was already dead. 6 of Kozlov's men, execution style. And Tommy was nowhere to be found. So you took the fall. Kozlov's men showed up right after the cops. They had photos of Tommy's body, told me he was already dead, but they'd make his family suffer if I didn't keep my mouth shut. They planted the murder weapon in my bike, made sure the GSR was on my hands. Jake met her eyes. I figured if I was going down anyway, at least Tommy's wife and kids would be safe. Maria's mind raced. But Elena says Tommy's alive. That's what she told me. Says she's been sending money to help support his family. That he's been watching from a distance, too scared to come forward because he knows Kozlov has people everywhere. Jake's voice cracked. If that's true, if he's been alive this whole time while I've been waiting to die, where is he now? I don't know. Elena might, but she's scared. She thinks Kozlov has people watching her, especially now that she's pregnant. Jake leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed. Detective, I know how this sounds. I know I'm a dead man asking you to believe the impossible, but that baby Elena's carrying, that's my child. My only chance at leaving something good in this world. If Tommy's alive, he can tell you what really happened in that warehouse. Maria studied Jake's face, searching for any sign of deception. She'd interrogated enough criminals to know when someone was lying, and every instinct told her Jake was telling the truth. But the implications were staggering. A wrongful conviction, a police investigation compromised by organized crime, and somewhere out there, a man who'd let his own brother sit on death row. If I help you, I need everything. Every detail about Tommy, about Kozlov's operation, about what you know happened that night. You'll do it? I'll look into it. But Jake, your execution is scheduled for next week. Even if we find Tommy, even if he corroborates your story, getting a stay at this point. She shook her head. The legal system doesn't like admitting mistakes. Jake nodded slowly. I know, but Elena and the baby deserve the truth. And if Tommy's really out there, if he's been living with this for 3 years, his voice hardened, then it's time for him to face what he's done. Maria gathered her things, her mind already working through the investigation she'd have to conduct in shadow, away from department oversight. Time was running out, and she was about to risk everything on the word of a condemned man. But sometimes the most dangerous criminals really did hide the deepest truths. The fluorescent lights in the visitor's room hummed with an electric tension that seemed to mirror the charge between Jake and Sarah as they sat across from each other, their hands pressed against the reinforced glass. Detective Morrison watched from the corner, her trained eye cataloguing every gesture, every micro-expression that passed between them. "Tell me about the night Marcus died," Sarah said suddenly, her voice cutting through Jake's rambling about the baby and their future that would never come. Jake's face went rigid. "What?" "You heard me." Sarah's eyes were steel now, nothing like the soft, grieving girlfriend she'd appeared to be moments before. "Tell me what really happened that night." Morrison straightened, her hand instinctively moving toward her weapon. Something had shifted in the room's dynamic, something she couldn't quite identify but felt in her bones. Jake stared at Sarah for a long moment, then let out a laugh that held no humor. "You're not pregnant, are you? Answer my question." Jesus Christ. Jake leaned back in his chair, running his cuffed hands through his hair. "How long have you been playing this game, Sarah? Or is that even your real name?" Morrison's mind raced. She'd run background checks on Sarah Collins, but now she was wondering if she'd been looking at an identity as carefully constructed as a house of cards. "My name is Sarah Collins," the woman said quietly. "But you're right about one thing. I'm not pregnant. I never was." The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Morrison stepped forward, but Sarah held up a hand without taking her eyes off Jake. "I'm Marcus Thompson's sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "Marcus had a sister," he said slowly. "He talked about you sometimes, said you were in college studying journalism, said you were the smart one in the family, the one who got out." "I did get out," Sarah replied, "but family is family. And when my little brother got murdered, I decided to come back." Morrison felt the case she thought she understood crumbling around her. "Ma'am, I need you to—" "He didn't kill Marcus," Sarah said, still looking at Jake. "Did you?" Jake's composure finally cracked. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since Morrison had known him, he looked like what he was, a man about to die for something he didn't do. "No," he whispered. "God help me. I didn't kill your brother." "Then why didn't you fight it?" Sarah's voice was raw now, all pretense gone. "Why did you take the plea? Why are you willing to die for this?" Jake was quiet for so long that Morrison thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because the person who really killed Marcus, if I talked, if I fought this, they'd kill someone else. Someone who matters more to me than my own life." "Who?" Morrison demanded, stepping closer to the glass. "Who are you protecting?" Jake looked at her for the first time since Sarah's revelation. "My daughter. My real daughter. She's 8 years old, and she lives with her mother in Portland. The people who killed Marcus made it very clear what would happen to her if I didn't take the fall." The room spun around Morrison. 8 months of investigation, of being certain they had their man, and now this. "Why should we believe you?" she asked, though something in her gut was already answering that question. "Because," Sarah said, pulling a small recording device from her purse, "everything he just said matches what I've spent the last 6 months investigating." Morrison stared at the device. "You've been recording this?" "I've been recording everything since I made contact with Jake. Every visit, every conversation." Sarah's voice was steady, professional. "I'm a journalist, detective, and I don't believe in coincidences or easy answers." Jake looked between the two women, something like hope flickering in his eyes for the first time in months. "You've been investigating Marcus's death?" "I never stopped investigating it," Sarah replied. "The official investigation was sloppy, rushed. They wanted someone to blame, and you were convenient. A biker with a record, known associates in the drug trade. Perfect scapegoat." Morrison's mind was working overtime, trying to process the implications. "If what you're saying is true, then we have a serious problem. Jake's execution is scheduled for 72 hours, Jake finished. "I know." Sarah leaned forward, pressing both palms against the glass. "Then we need to work fast, because I know who really killed my brother and I know why. But proving it," she looked at Morrison, "that's going to take all of us." Morrison looked at the condemned man and the sister of his alleged victim, both now looking at her with desperate hope. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen spread the crime scene photos across the conference table like a deadly deck of cards. Marcus Kane sat handcuffed to his chair, his leather jacket replaced with orange prison garb that somehow made his tattooed arms look more menacing under the harsh lighting. Across from him, Elena Rodriguez clutched a manila folder to her chest, her pregnant belly straining against her black dress. "Tell me about the night Tommy Ricci died," Chen said, her voice cutting through the tension. She slid a photograph toward Marcus. The warehouse where Tommy's body had been found, blood pooled around his head like a crimson halo. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I already told you everything." "No. You told us what you thought we wanted to hear." Elena leaned forward, her dark eyes blazing. "But I know the truth now, Marcus. I know what really happened that night." The room fell silent, except for the relentless hum of the lights. Marcus stared at Elena, something unreadable flickering across his scarred face. "Elena, don't—" "Don't what? Don't tell them how Tommy came to the warehouse already beaten half to death? Don't tell them about the real killer?" Chen's pen stopped moving across her notepad. Ms. Rodriguez, if you have information about this case—" "She doesn't know what she's talking about," Marcus interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. "She wasn't there." Elena opened the folder with shaking hands and pulled out a series of photographs. They were grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough to show two figures struggling in the warehouse doorway. One was unmistakably Marcus in his distinctive jacket. The other was smaller, wiry, with a spider tattoo crawling up his neck. "I was there," Elena whispered, "hidden in the old office upstairs. I followed you because I was scared, Marcus. Scared of what you might do when you found out Tommy had been skimming money from the club." Detective Chen studied the photographs. "Who took these?" "I did. With my phone." Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly. "I thought I was documenting my boyfriend becoming a killer. Instead, I watched him try to save a dying man." Marcus closed his eyes, his massive shoulders sagging. "Elena, please stop." "No, I won't stop. Not when they're going to execute you for something you didn't do." Tears streamed down her face as she turned to Chen. Tommy was already dying when Marcus found him. The real killer had left him there to bleed out. Marcus tried to help him, tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. Chen leaned back in her chair, processing this new information. If that's true, why didn't Kane report it? Why did he run? "Because the real killer was his brother," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus's eyes snapped open, filled with a pain that went deeper than any physical wound. "Elena!" "Jake Kane," she continued, ignoring Marcus's plea, "the golden boy of the family, the one who never got his hands dirty, never got involved with the club's business. Except he did. He'd been stealing from the accounts for months, and when Tommy found out—" Chen's mind raced. Jake Kane. She remembered him from the investigation. Clean record, solid alibi, devastated by his brother's arrest. He'd even testified at the trial about Marcus's violent tendencies, his history of bar fights and assault charges. "Jake killed Tommy to keep him quiet," Elena said, and when Marcus showed up unexpectedly, Jake was long gone. Marcus found his brother's wallet next to Tommy's body, a wallet that Jake claimed he'd lost days earlier. "So Kane covered for his brother," Chen said slowly, "took the blame to protect him." Marcus thought, if he got rid of the evidence, if he made it look like a robbery gone wrong, the police would never connect it to Jake. He never expected to be charged with murder himself. Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Jake's got kids, a wife, a normal life. Everything I never had, never could have. When they arrested me, instead of looking for the real killer, I figured it was better this way." "Better?" Elena's voice cracked. "You were willing to die for him?" "I was already dead inside, Elena. Had been for years. But Jake, he still had a chance to be something better than what we came from." Chen stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "These photos, do you have the originals?" Elena nodded. "Everything's on my phone. I never deleted them, even though Marcus begged me to. We'll need to verify their authenticity. Check the metadata." Chen looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. "Mr. Kane, if this is true, if you've been protecting your brother all this time—" "It doesn't matter now," Marcus said quietly. "The execution's tomorrow." "It matters to me," Elena said fiercely. "It matters to our baby. It matters to the truth." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Martinez spread the crime scene photos across the metal table one more time. 3 days had passed since Jenna's bombshell revelation about Tommy's whereabouts during the convenience store robbery, and the case that had seemed ironclad was unraveling thread by thread. "Look at this again," Martinez said to Detective Chen, pointing to a grainy surveillance photo. "The timestamp shows 11:47 p.m., but look at the shadow patterns. The positioning doesn't match the angle of the streetlights at that time of night." Chen leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "You think someone tampered with the footage?" "I think we need to talk to the store owner again. Vincent Castellano Martinez pulled up the man's file on his laptop. Funny how he was so quick to identify Tommy from the lineup, considering the perpetrator wore a ski mask the entire time. The drive to Castellano's pawn shop took them through the seediest part of downtown, where broken glass glittered on cracked sidewalks and graffiti told stories of territorial wars. The shop sat wedged between a bail bondsman and a check-cashing place, its windows barred and yellowed with age. Vincent Castellano emerged from behind bulletproof glass, his thick Brooklyn accent immediately apparent. "You cops again? I told you everything I know about that night." Martinez studied the man's nervous fidgeting. "Actually, Mr. Castellano, we have some new questions about the surveillance system you had installed just 2 weeks before the robbery. What about it? Insurance required upgraded security." "Funny thing about insurance claims," Chen interjected smoothly. "We pulled your records. You filed for substantial losses that night, but the actual inventory stolen doesn't match your reported damages. Care to explain the discrepancy?" Castellano's face reddened. "Look, maybe I rounded up a little. You know how it is. Inflation, replacement costs. To the tune of $50,000? Martinez stepped closer. "That's not rounding up, Vincent. That's fraud." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the tick of an old clock on the wall. Finally, Castellano's shoulders sagged. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. The Torino family, they don't take no for an answer." "What does the Torino family have to do with this?" "Everything." Castellano sank onto a stool behind the counter. "My business was hemorrhaging money, gambling debts, you know. Anthony Torino offered me a way out. Stage a robbery, collect the insurance, pay them back with interest." Martinez felt his pulse quicken. The Torino family was connected to half the organized crime in the state, so there was no robbery at all? "Oh, there was a robbery, but not the way I reported it. One of Torino's guys came in, roughed me up a little for authenticity, took some merchandise that was mostly junk anyway. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 minutes. Then, how does Tommy Morrison fit in?" Castellano's eyes darted toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst through. "That's where it gets complicated. See, Morrison had been sniffing around, asking questions about the Torinos. Word was, he had information about some of their operations. They wanted him gone." Chen exchanged a look with Martinez. "Gone how?" "Permanently. But they needed it to look legal, you know. So when this robbery thing came up, someone suggested killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Frame Morrison for the robbery, get him off the streets for good. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity." "Who approached you about framing Tommy?" "Anthony Torino's nephew, Marcus, said they had it all worked out. The timeline, the evidence, even had someone on the inside who could make sure the right evidence got to the right people." Martinez leaned against the counter. "Someone on the inside of the police department?" Before Castellano could answer, the shop's front door chimed. All three turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit enter, his cold eyes immediately assessing the situation. "Vincent," the man said in a voice like silk over steel. "I thought we discussed keeping certain conversations private." Castellano went pale. "Marcus, these detectives, they already knew most of it." Marcus Torino smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Did they? How unfortunate." His gaze shifted to Martinez and Chen. "Officers, I think there's been some misunderstanding. My friend Vincent here has been under tremendous stress lately, sometimes says things that aren't entirely accurate." Martinez's hand instinctively moved closer to his service weapon. "Mr. Torino, I presume? We'd like to ask you a few questions about Tommy Morrison." "I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name." Torino adjusted his cufflinks with practiced calm. "Vincent, perhaps you should reconsider what you think you remember about recent events. Memory can be such a fragile thing." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Chen had already reached for her radio, but Torino raised a hand. "No need for dramatics, detective. I was just leaving." He turned back to Castellano. "We'll continue our conversation later, Vincent, when you're feeling more clear-headed." As Torino walked toward the door, he paused beside Martinez. "Some cases are better left closed, Detective, for everyone's sake." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen spread the case files across the conference table, each manila folder representing another piece of the puzzle that had consumed her life for the past 3 months. Marcus Reaper Rodriguez sat shackled to his chair, his tattooed hands folded as he watched her work with the patience of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Tell me about the night Elena disappeared," Sarah said, sliding a photograph across the table. The image showed a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, the same woman who now carried Marcus's child behind bars 300 miles away. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I already told you everything. Elena was supposed to meet me at the warehouse, but she never showed. Next thing I know, Vegas people are saying I killed her, planted evidence in my bike, and I'm looking at the needle. But Elena's alive, Marcus. We found her. She's 7 months pregnant and scared out of her mind." Sarah leaned forward. "She's been hiding in a women's shelter in Phoenix, using a fake name. Says she's been running from someone who wants her dead." The color drained from Marcus's face. "That's impossible. They found her blood in the warehouse. Her DNA was on the murder weapon." "Whose blood was it, Marcus?" He stared at the photograph, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know." Sarah opened another file, revealing crime scene photos that had sealed Marcus's fate. The prosecution's case was airtight. "Your prints on the knife, Elena's blood, witnesses who saw you arguing with her the day before. But there's something that never made sense to me." She placed an evidence bag containing a small silver locket on the table. This was found clutched in the victim's hand. Elena's locket, according to the records. But when we showed it to Elena yesterday, she said she'd never seen it before in her life. Marcus's chains rattled as he leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone went to a lot of trouble to frame you for Elena's murder. Someone who knew about your relationship, knew her routines, and had access to enough of her personal information to create a convincing crime scene." Sarah's eyes never left his face. "Someone who wanted you out of the way permanently." The door to the interview room opened, and Captain Hayes entered with a grim expression. "Chen, we need to talk." Sarah followed him into the hallway, where he handed her a manila envelope marked urgent. "DNA results came back on the blood evidence," Hayes said. "It's not Elena Martinez. Whose blood is it?" "Maria Santos." "Ring a bell?" Sarah's mind raced. Vega's accountant. She disappeared 2 weeks before Elena supposedly died. Found her body this morning in a shallow grave outside the city. Medical examiner says she's been dead for months. Someone drained enough blood to stage Elena's murder scene. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Sarah rushed back into the interview room, where Marcus sat staring at the photograph of Elena. "Your girlfriend wasn't the target," Sarah said breathlessly. "She was the witness." Marcus looked up, confusion clouding his features. Elena worked at Vega's nightclub as a bookkeeper. She had access to financial records, saw things she wasn't supposed to see. When Maria Santos started asking questions about money laundering operations, Vega had her killed. But Elena knew Maria was getting close to exposing everything. "So they framed me to get Elena to run," Marcus said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Make her think I was a killer so she'd disappear and never testify. And if she ever surfaced, who would believe the word of a fugitive over a respected businessman like Vega?" Sarah pulled out her phone. "But Elena's ready to talk now. She's been carrying evidence for months, waiting for someone she could trust." The call connected, and Elena's voice filled the room through the speaker. "Marcus? Oh God, Marcus, is that really you?" His voice broke. "Elena, baby, I thought you were dead. Vega's men came to the apartment after you were arrested. They said if I didn't disappear forever, they'd kill our baby. I've been so scared, but when the detective found me, when she told me you were innocent..." "We have financial records, wire transfers, everything," Sarah interjected. Elena copied Vega's files before she ran. "It's enough to bring down his entire operation." Marcus closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "How long Until I can hold you. The DA is already preparing to drop all charges, Sarah said. You could be out by tomorrow. And Vega? Let us worry about Vega. Sarah gathered the files, evidence of a conspiracy that had nearly cost an innocent man his life. Right now, you have a family to get ready for. Through the phone, Elena's voice carried a mixture of relief and joy that seemed to fill the sterile room with warmth. We're going to be okay, Marcus. We're finally going to be okay. The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room buzzed like angry wasps as Detective Sarah Chen spread the photographs across the metal table. Marcus Reaper Sullivan sat across from her, his tattooed hands cuffed to the chair, but his eyes were clearer than she'd seen them in months. The revelation about Elena's pregnancy had shifted something fundamental in the room's dynamics. "Tell me about Vincent Torino," Sarah said, tapping the surveillance photo of a sharp-suited man leaving the Crimson Devils clubhouse. "Your club's accountant, according to our records." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Vincent's been moving money for the club for 3 years. Clean books, clean transactions. At least that's what we thought. What changed your mind?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Sarah had interviewed hundreds of suspects over her 15-year career, but something about Marcus's hesitation felt different. This wasn't the calculated pause of someone crafting a lie. This was the weight of a man deciding whether to burn bridges that could never be rebuilt. 2 weeks before Jenny Russo died, I caught Vincent in the club's office at 3 a.m, Marcus finally said. He had files spread everywhere, but when I walked in, he swept everything into a briefcase like his ass was on fire. Sarah leaned forward. "Did you see what was in those files?" "Bank statements. Real ones, not the sanitized versions he usually showed us. There were transfers I'd never authorized, accounts I'd never heard of." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. One of those accounts had Elena's name on it. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Elena Martinez was receiving money from your club?" "Not from the club, from Vincent. But he was using our accounts to funnel it." Marcus's eyes met hers, and she saw something she'd never expected from the notorious Reaper Sullivan: vulnerability. "I confronted Elena about it that night. She broke down, told me everything." Sarah's pen hovered over her notepad. Every instinct screamed this was the break they'd been waiting for, but she forced herself to remain skeptical. "What exactly did she tell you?" Marcus closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man reliving his worst nightmare. Elena wasn't just a witness to Jenny Russo's murder. She was supposed to be the target. The room seemed to contract around those words. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed began clicking into place. Vincent had been paying Elena to keep quiet about financial irregularities she'd noticed at the construction company where she worked. Marcus continued. "Russo Construction, Jenny's family business. Elena was their bookkeeper, and she'd stumbled onto evidence that Vincent was using the company to launder money for people way more dangerous than the Crimson Devils." "What kind of people?" "The Volkov family. Russian mob." Marcus's hands clenched into fists despite the restraints. "Vincent had been skimming from our operations and washing the money through Russo Construction, then funneling it to offshore accounts controlled by the Volkovs. Elena figured out the pattern and threatened to expose him." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. "So Vincent decided to eliminate her?" But Elena switched shifts with Jenny that night. Called in sick at the last minute because of morning sickness. She'd just found out she was pregnant but hadn't told me yet. Marcus's voice cracked. "Jenny Russo died because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, wearing Elena's jacket in a dimly lit parking garage." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Sarah studied Marcus's face, searching for any hint of deception, but found only raw honesty and barely contained rage. "If this is true, why didn't you come forward immediately? Why let yourself be charged with murder?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Who was going to believe me? A biker with a record saying some accountant was the real killer?" Vincent had covered his tracks perfectly. He made sure all evidence pointed to me, My bike was seen in the area. Jenny had been asking questions about the devil's legitimate businesses. It was a perfect frame job, but you had an alibi. My alibi was Elena, and she was too terrified to come forward. Vincent had made it clear that if she talked, both she and the baby would end up like Jenny. Marcus leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed. I chose a life sentence over risking theirs. Seemed like the right choice until they bumped it up to death row. Sarah set down her pen, her mind already formulating the next steps. If Marcus was telling the truth, they needed to move fast. Vincent Torino was still out there, and Elena Martinez was carrying evidence that could unravel a conspiracy reaching far beyond a simple murder case. Marcus, I need Elena to testify. Will she cooperate? His eyes hardened with determination. Detective, if you can guarantee her safety, Elena will tell you everything. She's been living in hell, watching an innocent man die for someone else's crime. The fluorescent lights continued their angry buzzing overhead, but the room felt different now, charged with the electricity of truth finally breaking free. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen spread the evidence files across the metal table in the prison conference room. Each photograph, each report represented another piece of a puzzle that had suddenly shifted into an entirely new configuration. Marcus Tank Rodriguez sat across from her, his massive frame somehow diminished by the orange jumpsuit and shackles, but his eyes burned with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "Tell me about Vincent Moreau," Sarah said, sliding a surveillance photo across the table. Marcus's jaw tightened. "What about him? You were working for him, not against him." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Through the reinforced window, Sarah could see other inmates shuffling through the yard, their lives reduced to concrete squares and chain-link boundaries. But here, in this sterile room, the real prison was the truth that Marcus had been carrying for 3 years. "Elena doesn't know," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She can't ever know." "Know what? That you were undercover for the DEA? That agent Rebecca Foster wasn't just another dealer you killed, but your handler?" Sarah leaned forward. "The records were buried so deep it took my team weeks to find them. Black ops, off the books, compartmentalized beyond belief." Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment, Sarah saw past the intimidating exterior to the exhaustion underneath. 3 years of maintaining a lie that had cost him everything. 3 years of letting the world believe he was a cold-blooded killer. "Foster was getting too close," he said. "Moreau's organization had people everywhere, police, prosecutors, even in the DEA. When Rebecca started connecting the dots between the motorcycle club and Moreau's money laundering operation, they made her. She was supposed to extract me that night, disappear me into witness protection. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong." Marcus opened his eyes, meeting Sarah's gaze. Moreau knew. He'd known for weeks. The meeting was a setup, but Rebecca didn't realize it until it was too late. When she walked into that warehouse, there were already 3 of Moreau's men waiting. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. You had to choose. Blow your cover to save her, or maintain it to keep the investigation alive. I made the wrong choice. The words came out raw, scraped from somewhere deep inside. I thought I could save her and keep the operation going. I thought I was smart enough to find another way. But Moreau... He handed me the gun himself, told me to prove my loyalty. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Sarah had seen plenty of confessions, but this wasn't guilt over a crime committed. This was something far more complex, the anguish of a man who had sacrificed everything for a mission that ultimately failed. "So you shot her?" I shot her in the shoulder. Made it look fatal, but aimed to wound. Rebecca played along. She was a good agent, understood what was at stake. We staged her death, but Marcus's voice cracked. One of Moreau's men put 2 more bullets in her head before we could get her out. Said he didn't trust half measures. Sarah sat back, processing the implications. The DEA let you take the fall. The operation was compromised. Too many leaks, too many dirty cops. If they admitted I was undercover, it would have blown the entire investigation and gotten other agents killed. So they buried the connection, let me go to trial. Marcus's hands clenched into fists despite the shackles. I agreed to it. Figured it was better than Elena and my unborn kid becoming targets. Jesus, Marcus, you've been on death row for a crime you were trying to prevent. I've been on death row for failing to prevent it. The distinction was important to him, she realized. In his mind, Rebecca Foster's death was still his responsibility, regardless of the circumstances. Through the window, Sarah watched a guard escort another inmate across the yard. How many secrets were buried in this place? How many men had taken their truths to the grave rather than risk the consequences of revelation? Elena's due date is in 2 weeks, Marcus continued. If I go through with this execution, she never has to know what I really was, never has to look over her shoulder wondering if Moreau's people are still out there. She can raise our daughter believing her father was just a man who made bad choices, not someone who brought danger into their lives. And if we stop the execution, if we expose the truth... Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, another crisis demanding attention in a world that seemed to generate them endlessly. Then Vincent Moreau finally wins, he said, and my family becomes collateral damage in a war I couldn't finish. Sarah stared at the files spread before her, each one a testament to the impossible choices that had led them to this moment. The truth was supposed to set people free, but sometimes it just created new prisons. The evidence room felt like a tomb as Detective Sarah Chen spread the files across the metal table. Marcus's confession had shattered everything they thought they knew about the Riverside massacre, but now came the harder task of proving it. Beside her, Detective Rodriguez rubbed his temples, still processing the bombshell that had exploded their case wide open. 3 years, Rodriguez muttered. 3 goddamn years we had the wrong man. Sarah pulled out the crime scene photos, her trained eye now seeing details that had been dismissed or explained away. Look at the blood spatter pattern again. We assumed Jake was standing here when he fired, but if Marcus is telling the truth... She positioned herself where Marcus claimed to have been during the shootout. The angle was completely different. The trajectory of the bullets that killed the rival gang members suddenly made sense from this position, not from where Jake supposedly stood. The ballistics report, Rodriguez said, flipping through pages. We found Jake's prints on the gun, but look at this notation. The examiner noted the grip pattern was inconsistent with someone Jake's height and hand size. Sarah's phone buzzed. The lab had fast-tracked the DNA analysis from Marcus's clothing, which had been stored as evidence but never fully processed. The preliminary results showed gunpowder residue that matched the type of ammunition used in the massacre. He's telling the truth, Sarah whispered. Jake really was trying to get out. The meeting wasn't about planning violence, it was about Jake leaving the Serpents. They worked through the night, reconstructing the events. Marcus had followed Jake to the warehouse, convinced his little brother was betraying the gang. When the rival Saints arrived for what they thought was a negotiation, Marcus saw only treachery. The shooting started when Marcus opened fire, believing Jake had set up an ambush. The witness statements, Rodriguez said, spreading them out. Mrs. Patterson from across the street said she saw 2 bikers enter the warehouse, but only one came out. We assumed the second one died inside. But it was Marcus who left first, Sarah realized. Jake stayed behind, probably trying to help the wounded. That's how his prints got on everything. He wasn't destroying evidence, he was calling for help. The security camera footage from a nearby convenience store, previously thought too grainy to be useful, suddenly took on new meaning. Enhanced and viewed with their new understanding, it clearly showed 2 distinct figures, one larger and more aggressive, one smaller and seemingly reluctant. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah called District Attorney Patricia Wells. The conversation was brief and intense. An innocent man was scheduled to die in less than 24 hours. We need to move fast, Wells said over the speakerphone. I'm calling the governor's office now, but we need ironclad evidence. Marcus's confession alone might not be enough. He could be lying to save his brother. Sarah had already thought of that. "We're bringing in Chloe again. If Marcus told her details about that night that only the real killer would know, details that weren't released to the public." An hour later, Chloe sat in the same interview room where everything had begun. Her face was pale but determined, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The baby had been kicking all night, as if sensing the gravity of what was happening. "Marcus told me he had nightmares," she began quietly, about the sound of broken glass under his boots, about how one of the victims was wearing a saint's jacket with a torn sleeve, about finding shell casings that had rolled under a workbench. Sarah exchanged glances with Rodriguez. None of those details had been released to the media. They were small, seemingly insignificant facts that only someone who had been there would know. "There's something else," Chloe continued. "Marcus said Jake tried to stop him, that Jake actually wrestled with him for the gun at one point. Marcus said he pushed Jake away so hard that Jake fell and cut his hand on some metal debris." Sarah flipped through the medical examiner's report on Jake's body. There it was, a fresh cut on Jake's left palm, treated with a makeshift bandage. They had assumed it happened during the original shooting, but the wound pattern suggested it was from sharp metal, not a bullet. "He also said Jake was crying," Chloe whispered. Marcus couldn't understand why his little brother was crying over dead saints until he realized Jake had been trying to make peace, not war. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Jake had died not as a killer but as a peacemaker. He had taken responsibility for his brother's crime not out of gang loyalty but out of love. He knew Marcus had a future with Chloe and the baby, while Jake saw himself as already lost to the violence. Sarah's phone rang. Governor Morrison's office. The execution had been stayed pending a full investigation. Jake Reeves would live to see another day, and perhaps, if they could prove what they now knew to be true, he would live to see freedom. But first, they had to convince a system that rarely admitted its mistakes, that sometimes the most dangerous criminals hide the deepest truths, and sometimes the most loyal hearts make the greatest sacrifices. The drive to the abandoned warehouse felt like descending into hell itself. Detective Sarah Chen gripped the steering wheel as Marcus guided them through the industrial maze, his voice barely steady as he recounted the horrors Vincent Reyes had orchestrated from behind bars. The man they'd thought was just another death row inmate had been pulling strings, manipulating witnesses and orchestrating murders while awaiting execution. "Turn left at the red building," Marcus said, his face pale in the dashboard light. "Sarah, I need you to know, what we're about to find in there, it's going to be bad." The warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows like dead eyes staring into the night. Sarah's radio crackled with updates from the tactical team converging on Vincent's known associates across the city. But this location, the one Marcus had finally remembered after years of suppressed trauma, this was where it all began. They approached the side entrance, weapons drawn. The metal door hung askew on rusted hinges. The smell hit them first, old death, decay, and something else that made Sarah's stomach turn. Marcus stumbled, pressing his hand against the wall. "Jesus," he whispered, "it's exactly the same." Sarah's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a nightmare preserved in shadow. Chains hung from support beams. Dark stains covered the concrete floor in patterns that told stories of unspeakable violence. But it was the far corner that made Marcus sink to his knees. "There," he pointed with a shaking hand. "That's where Tommy died. Vincent made me watch, made me choose between saving Tommy or saving myself." His voice broke. "I was 15 years old." Sarah's light illuminated scratches in the concrete, desperate claw marks, words carved with fingernails or broken glass. Among them, barely visible after all these years, she could make out Marcus was here, and beneath it, in different handwriting, Tommy Sullivan, 1987 to 2003. "Vincent told me if I ever talked, he'd hunt down everyone I cared about," Marcus continued, tears streaming down his face. "He had connections everywhere, police, courts, even prison guards. That's how he's been orchestrating everything from death row. Sarah's radio buzzed with urgent chatter. The raids were underway, and they were finding evidence that corroborated Marcus's story. Financial records showing payments to witnesses who'd testified against Danny Rodriguez. Phone logs proving contact between Vincent and his associates. Most damning of all, they'd found Vincent's lieutenant with a written hit list. Emma's name was at the top. "Detective Chen," came the voice through static. "We've got multiple arrests. Found enough evidence to overturn the Rodriguez conviction and charge Vincent with conspiracy to commit murder. How's your location?" Sarah looked around the warehouse, her mind racing. This place was a crime scene that had never been properly investigated. Tommy Sullivan's disappearance had been written off as a runaway teenager. No one had looked for him here. "Marcus," she said gently, "I need you to tell me everything, every detail you remember. Tommy's family deserves to know what happened to their son." As Marcus spoke, painting a horrific picture of Vincent's early crimes, Sarah began to understand the true scope of the conspiracy. Vincent hadn't just framed Danny Rodriguez. He'd been building a criminal empire based on fear and manipulation. The motorcycle club was just one tentacle of an organization that reached into law enforcement, the judicial system, and the streets. Her phone rang. Emma's number. "Sarah, thank God." Emma's voice was tight with fear. "Someone's been watching the safe house. The marshals think Vincent's people found us. What about Danny? Is he—" "Danny's going to be fine. We found the evidence, Emma." Marcus remembered everything. Vincent's going down, and Danny's coming home. The words felt surreal even as she spoke them. 24 hours ago, Danny Rodriguez was set to die for crimes he didn't commit. Now, the real architect of those crimes was about to face justice for murders spanning decades. Marcus stood slowly, looking around the warehouse one final time. "Tommy was going to be a teacher," he said quietly. "He always talked about helping kids like us, kids who got dealt bad hands." Vincent took that away. As they prepared to leave, Sarah's flashlight caught something else, a small pile of personal effects in what must have been Tommy's final resting place. A class ring, a wallet, and a folded piece of paper. She carefully bagged the evidence, knowing it would help bring closure to a family that had waited 20 years for answers. The warehouse would be crawling with forensics teams within the hour. Vincent's network was crumbling as arrests continued throughout the city, and somewhere in a secure location, Emma carried the future that Vincent had tried so desperately to destroy. But as they walked toward their car, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent had one final card to play. Desperate men did desperate things, and Vincent Reyes had nothing left to lose. The visiting room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Detective Sarah Chen stared at the evidence Marcus had just revealed, her mind racing to piece together the implications. The USB drive containing security footage, the detailed financial records, the photographs, all of it painted a picture that turned their entire investigation upside down. Vincent Romano wasn't just laundering money through the auto shop, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was revealing. He was running girls. Young ones, some barely 18. His jaw clenched. "That's what I really walked in on that night." Lila's hand found his across the small table, her pregnancy making her movements careful and deliberate. "Tell them about the girl," she whispered. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving Chen's face. There was a girl there, couldn't have been more than 16. Romano had her locked in the back office, strung out and terrified. When I confronted him about the missing parts from my bike, I heard her crying. His voice cracked slightly. "I've done a lot of bad things in my life, detective, but I draw the line at hurting kids." Chen leaned forward, studying Marcus's face for any sign of deception. Everything about his demeanor had changed from their previous interviews. Gone was the resigned acceptance of his fate, replaced by an urgency that seemed genuine. "Why didn't you tell us this during the investigation?" "Because Romano had connections everywhere. Cops, judges, lawyers, the whole system was compromised. Hell, your own captain was on his payroll." Marcus pulled out another document from the envelope. Check the bank records. Captain Morrison received payments every month for 3 years. The revelation hit Chen like a physical blow. Morrison had been the one pushing hardest for Marcus's conviction, insisting they had their man despite some inconsistencies in the evidence. He'd also been the one to reassign her when she'd started asking too many questions about Romano's business dealings. Lila shifted uncomfortably in her chair, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "We've been gathering evidence for months," she said quietly. "Ever since the trial ended. Marcus knew he was going to die, but he couldn't let those other girls suffer." "Other girls?" Chen's pen hovered over her notepad. Marcus nodded grimly. Romano's operation was bigger than anyone realized. The auto shop was just one location. He had safe houses all over the state, moving girls through a network that stretched from here to the Mexican border. He slid another photograph across the table. This was taken 6 months ago. 3 girls who disappeared from foster care. All of them ended up in Romano's system. Chen studied the image, recognizing 2 of the faces from missing person reports that had crossed her desk. The 3rd girl looked familiar too, though she couldn't immediately place her. "The night Romano died," Marcus continued, "I didn't go there to kill him. I went to get the girl out. But he pulled a gun first, said he'd rather see her dead than lose his investment." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "We fought. The gun went off, but by then the girl had already escaped through the back window." "Where is she now?" Chen asked. "Safe," Lila answered. "We got her into a program, helped her get clean. She's been too scared to come forward, but if it means saving Marcus..." She looked at her boyfriend with tears in her eyes. "She's willing to testify." The guard near the door shifted restlessly, checking his watch. Visiting time was almost over, and Marcus's execution was scheduled for the next morning. Chen felt the pressure of time weighing on every second. "There's more," Marcus said, urgency creeping into his voice. Romano kept detailed records of everyone involved. Politicians, business owners, even some federal agents. The whole network is documented on that drive. Chen's mind was spinning with the implications. If even half of what Marcus was telling her was true, it would expose a corruption scandal that reached the highest levels of local government. But she also knew how difficult it would be to verify everything in time to stop the execution. "Detective," Lila said, leaning forward despite her obvious discomfort, "there's something else you need to know about Morrison. He was there that night." Chen's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Security footage shows him arriving at Romano's shop 20 minutes after Marcus got there. He helped stage the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper now. Morrison knew about the trafficking operation because he was protecting it. The visiting room door opened, and the guard stepped forward. "Time's up." As Marcus stood to return to his cell, he locked eyes with Chen one final time. "Those girls are still out there, Detective. If I die tomorrow, who's going to save them?" The courtroom erupted in chaos as Detective Martinez slammed the evidence folder onto the prosecutor's table. 3 hours had passed since Jake Reaper Morrison walked free, and the real killer, his own defense attorney Richard Holloway, sat in handcuffs where his client had been condemned to die. 23 years, Judge Catherine Wells said, her voice cutting through the din. 23 years this man sat on death row for murders committed by the very person sworn to defend him. Sarah pressed closer to Jake's side, her hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing the magnitude of the moment. She'd known, somehow deep down she'd always known Jake was innocent, but the truth had been more twisted than anyone could have imagined. Holloway's confession played back in Martinez's mind. The arrogant lawyer had broken completely when confronted with the DNA evidence from the warehouse, where Tommy Rivera had been tortured. A microscopic blood spatter on an old case file had been his undoing, Jake's case file, which Holloway had kept as a trophy of his perfect crime. "I needed someone to take the fall," Holloway had said, his polished facade cracking. Jake was perfect, a biker with a record, easy to frame. "I just had to make sure I was assigned as his lawyer to control the defense." The Serpent's Motorcycle Club had been Holloway's cover for years, using his legal connections to launder money and eliminate witnesses. When Jake had stumbled onto the operation, Holloway had orchestrated the murders of Jake's supposed victims, including Rivera, then planted evidence to ensure Jake would take the fall. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Wells continued, "the state of Texas owes you an apology that no words can adequately express. The compensation process will begin immediately, though nothing can restore the decades stolen from you." Jake stood slowly, his hand finding Sarah's. The courtroom felt surreal after so many years in a concrete cell. "Your Honor, I don't want money. I want my life back." "You have it," she said firmly. "All charges dismissed. You're free to go." Outside the courthouse, media swarmed like vultures. Jake shielded Sarah from the cameras, his protective instincts sharp despite the chaos in his head. Freedom felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrifying and liberating simultaneously. Martinez approached them near the courthouse steps. "Jake, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. We failed you." "You found the truth," Jake replied. "That's what matters now. The Serpents are finished. We've arrested 12 members, including the chapter president." Holloway gave up everything trying to cut a deal. Martinez paused. "Your old bike is in evidence lockup. Thought you might want it back." Jake almost smiled. "Keep it. I've got more important things to ride for now." Sarah squeezed his hand as another contraction hit, stronger this time. They'd been coming regularly for the past hour, but she hadn't wanted to interrupt Jake's moment of vindication. "Jake," she whispered urgently, "the baby's coming." Everything else, the reporters, the lawyers, the chaos of his exoneration, faded into background noise. Jake swept Sarah into his arms, carrying her toward the waiting ambulance Martinez quickly summoned. 23 years I dreamed of this," Jake murmured as they rushed toward the hospital. "Not just freedom, but a family, a future." Sarah gripped his hand through another contraction. "She's been waiting for you to come home." "She?" "I found out yesterday. I was going to tell you." Sarah's words dissolved into a gasp of pain and joy. The delivery room was nothing like the sterile visiting rooms where Jake had spent decades. Here, life was beginning instead of waiting to end. When his daughter finally arrived, tiny, perfect, screaming with healthy lungs, Jake wept for everything he'd lost and everything he'd gained. "What should we name her?" Sarah asked, exhausted but radiant. Jake studied his daughter's face, seeing Sarah's eyes and his own stubborn chin. Outside, the sun was setting over a world he was finally free to explore. "Hope," he said without hesitation. "Her name is Hope." Detective Martinez appeared in the doorway, holding a bouquet of flowers and an unexpected smile. "Heard there was a new Morrison in the world." "Want to meet her?" Jake asked, still marveling at how normal words felt. Casual conversations, simple kindness, the assumption of tomorrow. As Martinez admired the baby, Jake realized the weight he'd carried for over 2 decades had finally lifted. The anger, the bitterness, the dreams of revenge, all of it had evaporated the moment Hope opened her eyes. "She's beautiful," Martinez said. "You're going to be a good father." Jake looked at his daughter, then at Sarah, then out the window at a sky he could finally claim as his own. "I'm going to try." For the first time in 23 years, Jake Morrison had hope for tomorrow.